Today's episode of the Dipti and Toby Show is dedicated to a really good friend of mine who really sadly, unexpectedly passed away a week or so ago, Paige O'Callaghan. She was my personal trainer and a really, really good friend of mine. So basically I want to dedicate today's show to you, Paige. Paige meant a lot to me and a lot to a lot of people. She was the most positive person I think I've ever known in my life. She was so motivational. She's definitely gone too soon, and I'm going to really miss you, Paige, and I'm sure a lot of people are as well. So this episode on grief today is totally dedicated to you. Rest in plank, Paige, my beautiful friend.
So, I said so. Today, we are going to talk about something that is very dear to Dipti, and she is an expert in, and that is grief. Yeah, and I'm just interested in, it's a bit like death. Death happens all the time to us all and to everyone we know, but we don't talk about it over here in the, in the West. It's kind of a bit of a taboo subject, which is totally odd, isn't it? So, and to me, it's similar as grief. When Dipti said she was going to write a book about grief, I was like, well, no one's going to read it because no one talks about it, but we all experience it, don't we? Many more ways than we actually realise. I nearly said so.
I wondered what you were doing then. Thought you'd wet yourself. Like, not on my chair. Anyway.
Yeah.
So he stopped saying it and he's passed it on to me.
I implanted the word into her head.
We are talking about grief. Grief is very close to my heart. And, when I did tell Toby I was writing a book about grief, it wasn't because that was my mission in life. It was because it wasn't really a book to start off with, was it? It was more like my own way of healing through my own grieving, because I lost both my parents to cancer, and I was kind of in my 20s when I lost my dad, and then in my 30s when I lost my mum. So grief was very much in my world. So I've written a book called Good Grief, which you can also see behind me. And it's really...
It's a weird title, isn't it? Good Grief.
Yeah, it is a weird title because you don't expect grief to be good, but that's the whole point of the book. I realised that grief was actually a good thing. So we mustn't avoid it. We mustn't pretend it's not relevant in our lives. We must sort of embrace it and expect it. That's my theory, and that's my view.
Yeah.
Especially because grief isn't something that happens only when people die. That's what we think happens. We associate grief with death, but I think grief happens literally all the time,
What do you mean?
Like, for example, you leaving London to move to the Cotswolds to live with me. Do you think that you felt grief and still maybe do feel grief for living in London? See?
No.
He's grieving.
I love the countryside.
But you know what I mean? You were probably feeling...
Yeah, I totally missed London and the options in London and the busyness and, the opportunities. Yeah, massively. Yeah.
You will move from London to the Cotswolds. You've always wanted to live in the Cotswolds. You love the countryside. Awake.
Anyway, I was just saying how much I love the countryside and the Cotswolds and that.
So that's grief, you're leaving something behind. And it's almost like people associate grief with having a really terrible, tough time. It doesn't have to be terrible and tough. It's just an acknowledgement of a passing or a loss or a change, a significant change.
We can grieve our youth
Yes.
as well.
Talk about that. Can I just cough? Again. Sorry.
I might edit this bit. I'm not going to talk during the cough.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay.
I was just talking to Dipti's son, who is 17, and I said, "What are you doing New Year's Eve?" He said he's going out to a party, and he said, "This is my first New Year's Eve party." And I was just like, wow, you're so lucky. You know, you've got 15 years of, you know, amazing New Year's Eve parties to look forward to. I mean, that's incredible, isn't it? You know.
And does that mean you were grieving? Was part of you grieving?
I was very jealous. Yeah.
So is that kind of, yeah, some people would call it jealousy, but do you feel that you're grieving your youth and that's part of that? You can see him doing what you liked doing, you know?
Yeah, and it's like that's gone now. You know, it's like it is dead. You know, that I'm not going to be 17, 18, 19 again as much as I would like to be at times. You know?
Did you ask him if you could go to the party with him?
I didn't. No, I think I'd be too cool for the party now.
Funny, but that's an interesting one, isn't it? We don't think about getting older as well, we might think about getting older as, you know, something that you don't want to do, but you don't think about it as you might be grieving your youth. But that's a good one. Another thing you could be doing is grieving, you know, anything like a relationship ending. Even though the person might not have died, you're still grieving that.
So like if you break up with someone, I mean, that is like a death in a way,
yeah,
isn't it?
Yeah.
Because that person is kind of gone for you forever, really.
Yeah. So there's so many different types of grief that people can experience, and that's why I think it's really important that you prepare for it, or even actually just at first just understand it, because grief can then come out in so many different ways. So it can come out from a spectrum of low mood depression all the way up to high level anxiety and panic. So, you know, quite a lot of psychological disturbance can happen when you're grieving. You can also start to feel things like paranoia, intense emotional overwhelm, so, you know, immense guilt, and you could get like those really random guilty thoughts that can loop around your mind, so you can get into that paranoid thinking quite quickly when you're grieving. You can also feel things so intensely and so all encompassing 1 minute, and then the next minute nothing, the complete absence of anything. So it's like so, you know, roller coastery.
Do you think you can get levels of grief as well, as in intensity?
Yeah.
Because like if someone dies, the intensity could be much stronger than me grieving my youth, you know.
Yeah, but you would have thought that it would work like that, but I don't think it does. I think you can get intensity and absence of intensity in any type of loss or change.
Wow.
So, but that's the confusing thing. That's why people don't realise it's grief, because they think grief has to be all intensive. But it's also the absence of emotion. You know, when you feel dead, devoid, empty,
yeah,
nothing, you know,
yeah.
And that is part of grief as well. So the reason why we have to go into that nothing space or that devoid space is because it's kind of like a shock absorber to the system. So for example, when my dad died, it was quite a shock because it wasn't something that we expected to happen so quickly. He was diagnosed with leukemia so this was, you know, in the May, and then we were not given a prognosis, and he actually died in the September. So June, July, August. So yeah, that was 4 months from diagnosis to death. So it wasn't very long at all. So obviously when he died, I literally was in complete shock, in denial. I couldn't get my head around that idea, because my dad was very, very present in my life. You know, every single decision I made, everything, I ran past my dad. You know, usually they say the daughters and the mums are really close, but actually it was me and my dad. So it almost felt like I literally had my arms and legs cut off. So I was going through shock. Well, I was in shock for probably a year, I would say, where I just had nothing, no feelings. Everything just felt numb, and everything felt, I don't know, I can't really describe it. It just felt like I had no sensation anywhere, you know.
Wow. And
I was just going through life, doing the just same things that I always did, just going through the motions. Some people would call that depression, but I wasn't depressed. I was kind of still happy to kind of go to work, you know, see my friends, still go out, but I just had this numbness around me. And I thought that was just really interesting, because that is your brain and your body protecting you from anything else. So what was happening, I now know, is that my emotional brain was being protected with kind of a layer of, I don't know, say cotton wool. So anything else that was emotionally challenging wasn't able to get in so easily. So your emotional mind was still kind of being protected. So it kept you kind of safe. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, you become detached.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it is a sense of
yourself in a way. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that's a protective mechanism, like your shock absorber in your car. So any more lumps and bumps, you won't feel them so intensely because you can't handle it. Sure, to your overall well-being, you've got to do it.
And then after that, then did you experience any other emotions or?
So I think after a year went by, where all the anniversaries, you know, the birthday, the Christmas, just anything else that came, my birthday, his birthday, all of those family occasions, once I got through all of those, it kind of felt safe to start kind of interacting back into the world again. So for that whole year, I didn't really evaluate it. It's just now looking back, knowing what I now know, I see it really clearly. So when you're in that space, it doesn't mean that you have to panic and think, oh my goodness, I'm depressed, I need to go and see a doctor. I personally think, this is my viewpoint, I think you just need to understand that you're grieving and it will pass, you know, and there's nothing wrong with you. You're not going mad. You suddenly haven't lost all connection to, you know, emotional awareness. It's just your body doing what it needs to do.
It sounds like we're all experiencing grief on some level at some point. If we don't know how to go with the change or let go of the past, or, you know, I think the Buddha said, didn't he, the only constant in life is change.
Yeah.
So it's a wonder we're not taught about grief at school, isn't it? You know?
Yeah, and the possibility of grief being really relevant in your life. And children can grieve, animals can grieve, you know, we know this, because we all have the capacity to feel and to love. And that's one of the really lovely quotes about grief, is you grieve if you've loved. You don't grieve if you haven't loved that thing or that person or that scenario or that situation. If it's something you didn't feel something for, then it doesn't really matter if it disappears, you know. So the fact that we are creatures of ability to have love in our life means that we're going to have grief.
Yeah, that's just the polarity, isn't it? There's
Yeah.
light, there's dark, there's life, there's death, there's love, there's grief.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh. I mean, is there anything that people can do then to realise they're grieving, and then what can you do to make the process, you know, to get through the process?
Well, there's no fast track through grief. Unfortunately, you can't press a button and hope it goes away. That's the problem with our I suppose, our way of thinking at the moment that may have got into, is that we can just quickly get over something.
There's not an app for it.
There's no app. Yeah. You can't just kind of, Control Alt Delete and then grief just disappears. The only way to get through grief is through grief, unfortunately. But if you don't understand it, then it's going to feel frightening, isn't it?
Yeah, you could probably feel like you're going mad.
Yeah.
I can imagine. Yeah.
But if you understand it and if you expect it and almost invite it in, then it doesn't feel so threatening. It's almost like, that's why I was able to say you can turn bad grief into good grief. That's why I chose this title of this book. And the other thing is, I chose this little diagram of the cloud and the rain and the sun to just sort of show that, especially where we live in Britain, in the UK, we have this thing called the rain and the cloud, and sometimes, if we're lucky, we get the sun. But, us in the UK, we don't kind of all get depressed as soon as it starts raining. You kind of understand that the rain will pass, and the sun will come out again one day eventually. So that's the idea of grief. It does pass. Whatever you're going through will pass. It only stays relevant if you keep the focus on it in a negative way, I guess.
I think, what people might be thinking though is, say you've been married for 40 years and your partner dies.
Yeah.
Would you want to kind of get over that, or it would just pass,
No, and of course...
Because you're never going to forget.
No, but grief isn't about forgetting. It's about helping you honour that feeling and that loss. And actually, that's why you don't want to dismiss it and you don't want to pretend it's not happening. You do want to honour it. You do want to look at it. And also, of course, that's going to be a massive change in your life, not just in the way you do things, but how you see the world will change. And that is a time where you've got to kind of wrap yourself up, in cotton wool. That's why that shock thing is a good idea, because it will keep you protected.
But yeah, so that's a disassociation, isn't it? So we can be associated into our experience or disassociated. That is a brain kind of state. Yeah.
So that's why I want to explain to people that you can be disassociated and associated at the same time. If you're completely disassociated, that's where you kind of lose all connection with reality and what is going on in your life.
Psychopathic.
Yeah. So if you can stay disassociated but also understand that you have to be associated at the same time, that's a skill. So how can I explain that? I don't know how to explain it. I don't know how to explain it in a way I've done it.
Well, there's got to be some kind of acceptance to what's happening.
That's probably it.
Yeah, because if you don't accept it, you could still be grieving, something 50 years later, and it could be affecting your day-to-day life, couldn't it? If you haven't accepted it fully and probably felt the pain and the suffering and the emotions, would you say?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So acceptance is the key to understanding you can be associated in the disassociation, because you're sort of agreeing that you've got this loss, or you're faced with this loss, but you're also accepting that you're faced with the loss. So you are able to feel all of the pain or the anguish, the sadness or the guilt. but you don't then attach any more drama to that emotion, if that makes sense. It's going to be...
Doesn't sound easy.
No, it's not easy. It's going to be emotionally overwhelming. That's just how it is. And if you accept the emotional overwhelm, it then kind of moves through a little bit easier. It's a bit like, I suppose the example I can give you is pain management. And I know this won't mean anything to you because you have not had a baby, but talking of...
Not yet.
Hopefully, well, maybe, you never know, modern advancement. Yeah, I can't imagine you pregnant, to be fair. So, with my hypnobirthing clients, I don't ever say to them, right, it's going to be fine, you're not going to have any pain whatsoever. No way, because that's not true, and that's certainly not going to be the case. So I teach them to expect pain, but to also learn to manage it. So they're not trying to pretend it's not painful. They're not trying to deny that there is going to be pain. They acknowledge there is going to be pain, but also they're kind of 2 steps ahead where they're going to be preparing for how to manage that pain. So that's the same idea here. It's like grief is painful and, you know, it comes at you at so many different levels and so many different kind of areas where you kind of, you know, can pull the rug from under your feet, and you can go from so intense to nothing at all, and it's just so crazy, like a kaleidoscope of a mixture of emotions. So if you expect that's going to happen, you're kind of then prepared for it, you know, and that's the idea really. So really it's about really learning to understand it first of all, then learn how to prepare for it, and then when it does strike, you've kind of got a good handle on it, potentially. A bit like my analogy I used, I wrote a blog about this the other day, and the analogy I used about learning to swim. So imagine you could not swim, and someone decided to teach you to swim by throwing you off a boat into the ocean. You're either going to sink or swim, but your body's going to be in such a panic trying to stay afloat. You might be all right and you might survive, or you might not. But that's a harsh way of learning to swim. Surely it's much better to just go to the swimming pool and get some gentle lessons. And then if you did happen to fall overboard by mistake, you've got some chance of surviving, you know, and it might not be great, but at least you've got some strategies in place.
People don't like, if we don't want to think about death, then people aren't likely to go on a grief think, well, in 20 years, you know, this is going to happen, so I'll go on a grief course now and prepare myself.
No, of course not. But that's why I'm really interested in educating people about the whole concept of grief, that it's not only related to death. And my view, my personal view is everybody is grieving something, they just don't know it's called grief. You know, that's really my view. So how would you know you're grieving something? Well, if you're feeling kind of, I call it like a homesickness, sort of a feeling of you're not quite sure, you don't feel quite right, but you don't quite know why. Maybe a feeling of being lost in the past, and you can't seem to like be okay in your present, and your future doesn't look great either. You know, that sort of idea. Other ways of defining grief would be where you are just, there's just this like bubbling sadness inside of you and you just can't shift it. Perhaps also feeling lonely a lot of the time when even you're not lonely. So being lonely in a crowded room because you feel like people don't understand you because you're the only one feeling these feelings.
Wow. I bet there's lots of people getting prescribed antidepressants.
And anxiety issues.
Yeah, they're actually just kind of experiencing this
grief. And that's why you don't need to take medication to be grieving, you just need to understand it. This is your prescription if you feel like you are going through any of these things. You know, I really think read this, it will make sense, you'll feel better, you'll know that you're not going mad, and you'll just be able to deal with it. And it's not about pressing a button and reading this and everything goes away either, because that's not what this is about. This is about feeling it, you know, and really kind of inviting it in. And I wish I'd printed out the poem by Rumi.
No, I was thinking that.
But I could go and get my phone.
Pause it.
Way to get through grief is to grieve. And I think we need to finish on my favourite poem, and it's The Guest House by Rumi.
The guest house. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still treat each guest honourably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice. Meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. Lovely.
Nice. Good. Well, that's it for our series of this.
Series 1, 8 episodes.
Yeah, of this series of Dipti and Toby Show, but we will be back, won't we?
Yeah, I need to buy some new jumpers and clothes, I think. And,
Okay, so to follow Toby, what do you have to do?
I'm joking. I've got a website called Messages That Move, and by now it'll be linked to my YouTube channel, and that's got all my films on, and that's an ongoing development of my authentic self.
Nice, and if you want to find out more about me, you can visit my website, which is diptitate.com. And of course, if you've liked everything that you've seen here, please do subscribe to my channel. And the bubble of subscription is here. And we will see you again, I'm sure.
Yeah, so that'll be like series 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be like Game of Thrones.
Amazing.
Brilliant.
Good, bye for now.
Yeah.
See you another time.
Well done, us.
Bye.
Or the back, is it? I don't know.